The city of Oakhaven is submerged in mist and prayers reeking of blood. At the heart of the court of justice, Judge Thorne lies dead, beside a pristine white warrant. Time is running out as the darkness begins to swallow the final candles. Julian Vane recognizes the words, carved in fresh blood, appearing under the sacred fire. The name of a traitor, executed by the Parliament 10 years ago, has suddenly resurfaced. A horrifying conspiracy is crawling out from the cracks of the law of equity. The Christian priest stands in the shadows, his hand gripping the seal of power, filled with a murderous aura. Each toll of the chapel bell rings like a countdown to the dying hour of justice. Do not look back, for the ghost from the past is reclaiming a debt that oblivion should have erased. The first time Snow came to Hollow Hill, she came the way all girls come to that place. Sudden, like a bird striking glass. One moment she was elsewhere, seated at her laptop in a cramped apartment that smelled of instant noodles and rejection letters from literary agents. And the next, she was standing in a ballroom, lit by 10,000 candles, wearing a dress the color of a fresh wound, surrounded by people who smiled at her with too many teeth. Lord, she thought, smoothing the silk over her hips. Lord, I know this place. She knew it the way a writer knows her own sentences. She had written this ballroom herself, or something like it, years ago, before her marriage, before her divorce, before she learned that fairy tales had a different kind of poison in them than she'd been warned about as a girl. She had written it, and it had eaten her. The ballroom of Prince Aldrich Vane was magnificent in the way that a Venus flytrap is magnificent, beautiful, patient, and designed entirely around the act of closing. There were flowers everywhere, white roses, their stems stripped of thorns by some poor servant's bleeding hands. There were musicians in the gallery above, playing something that lilted and swayed and made you feel inexplicably that you had already consented to whatever was about to happen. And at the center of it all, tall as a courthouse and twice as severe, stood the prince himself. Snow had never seen a man wear cruelty so naturally. It fit him like a second skin, like something he'd been measured for at birth. He had the jaw of a man accustomed to being right, and the eyes of something that hunted by standing still. When he smiled at her across the room, her stomach turned a slow, deliberate somersault. 60, she reminded herself. He is number 60. She smiled back. Old folklore will tell you that every haunted house has a thing in the cellar. In Appalachia, they call it the keeping room. Not a room for keeping things safe, mind you, but a room for keeping them contained. Hollow Hill's keeping room was no different. Snow found it on her third night in the castle, because Snow had been in enough castles to know where the bad doors hide. They always put them somewhere logical, behind the pantry, beneath the chapel, at the end of a hallway that smells of rust and candle smoke and something older than both. She took the candle stub that Grumble had pressed into her palm. Grumble being the youngest and meanest of the 7 dwarves who worked the prince's land and knew more about his business than they were wise to. She followed the smell down 3 flights of stone stairs to a door with too many locks on it. The locks were not to keep something in. The locks, she understood, when she opened them one by one, with the ring of keys Grumble had pressed into her other hand, were to keep witnesses. Inside were the girls. She counted 14. Some were upright in their glass cases, dressed in their finest, hair arranged like they were sleeping, except Their eyes were open, glassy and tracking, alive in the way a moth pinned to felt is still alive for a little while. They breathed, they blinked, their fingers moved in small, terrible circles at their sides, like women embroidering invisible cloth in their sleep. "He calls them his collection," Grumble said from behind her. She had not heard him follow her. He was good at that. Small men often are. "Says a beautiful thing don't stay beautiful unless you preserve it." Snow looked at the nearest girl, 17 maybe, red hair that had been combed so many times it looked like spun copper. Her lips had been touched with something, a rouge that didn't quite match the blood beneath it. "Which one was she?" Snow asked. Grumble was quiet a moment. "The third one," he said. "From my village." Snow pressed her thumb against the girl's glass case. The girl's eyes moved, slow as oil, and found her face. Something urgent passed through them. A scream, with nowhere to go. "All right?" Snow said softly. She was not speaking to Grumble. She blew out the candle. In the old stories, the ones they cleaned up for children and ruined in the cleaning, the stepmother is always the witch. She is vanity and poison, and the dark impulse of the feminine, rendered manageable by being placed in opposition to goodness. Margaret Vane, née Hollowell, was not those things. Margaret was a woman who had married into Hollow Hill at 19, and learned room by room and year by year what kind of house it was. She had survived it the way women of a certain era survive things, by becoming necessary, by making herself indispensable to the machinery of the place, until the machinery could not run her out without seizing up entirely. She managed the kitchens, the accounts, the tenants, the correspondence. She knew every secret the house kept, because she was the one who kept them. When Snow first arrived, the first time years ago now, the time that counted, Margaret had tried to warn her, the only way she knew, obliquely, through action rather than speech, because speech in Hollow Hill had a way of getting back to the prince, and the prince had a way of dealing with things that got back to him. She had sent the huntsman, not to harm the girl, God above, to frighten her off, to send her running, before the prince got his hooks in her properly. But the huntsman was a weak man, and Snow had been a trusting girl that first time, and the plan had gone sideways, the way all plans eventually do when they rely on weak men. Now Margaret stood in the doorway of Snow's room and watched the young woman lace her boots with the calm efficiency of a person who had somewhere specific to be and something specific to do when they got there. "You need the blue tincture or the white?" Margaret asked. "Neither." Snow looked up. "He doesn't fall from tinctures. I tried that the 32nd time." "The sleeping draft?" 28th. Margaret leaned against the door frame and studied the woman her stepson had been sent, again, by whatever system ran the world's worst story. She had never quite gotten used to the fact that Snow had been here before, that she was older inside than she looked outside, carrying 60 lifetimes of being hunted and hated and nearly preserved in a glass case in that basement. "The blade, then," Margaret said. "The blade," Snow confirmed. Margaret nodded once, the way women nod when they have made peace with a necessary thing. "I'll have Grumble ready the back garden," she said. "He complains about it, but he's good with a shovel. He does love to complain. It's the only joy that boy has left." Margaret pushed off the door frame. "I'll put the kettle on. You'll want tea after." Snow smiled. The real smile, not the one she kept for ballrooms. "I always want tea after. They say a con only works on the greedy. This is only partly true. Akan also works on the proud, and Aldrich Vane was the proudest man in 3 counties. Snow found him in his study, surrounded by the trophies of his various hunts, antlers and pelts, and, on a special shelf behind glass, the small personal effects of girls he had taken. A hairpin, a shoe, a little leather journal. Snow recognized the journal. It had been hers the first time. "You're late," he said, without turning from the window. "I was admiring the gardens," she said. He turned then, and she saw the thing she always had to remember about men like him, that they were handsome. It would be easier if they weren't. It would be simpler if wickedness rearranged the face into something the eye could distrust on sight, even as the iron closed on your ankle. "Come here," he said. She crossed the room. She moved the way she had learned to move across these 60 encounters, slowly enough to seem compliant, with enough hesitation to seem frightened, with just enough warmth in her expression to seem convincible. A woman performing, almost surrender. It was a very specific art. He touched her face, tilting her chin, measuring her, the way he measured everything, for display, for preservation, for the adding of one more beautiful thing to his particular collection of beautiful things. "You know," he said, conversationally, "I've been having the strangest feeling that we've met before." "I have one of those faces," Snow said. "No," he said, and for a moment, something sharp moved behind his eyes, something that was almost intelligence. "No. It's more like reading the last chapter of a book and recognizing the ending. Then you know how it ends," she said. She was already moving. She drew the blade from her sleeve. What came next took no longer than a breath, and was nothing at all, like the stories tell it. Afterward, Snow stood at the window and watched the moon hang low and yellow over the hills of Hollow Hill, and she thought about endings, about how the same story can mean different things, depending on where you started. The old story started with a girl and ended with a prince and called it love. This story started with love, real love, the first time, genuine and humiliating in its completeness, and had been trying to end with preservation ever since. She was done being preserved. She poured herself a measure of brandy from the prince's cabinet, because it was good brandy, and there was no reason good brandy should go to waste. By the time Snow came downstairs, Margaret had laid the good table, the one in the kitchen, not the dining room, because they were women who ate in kitchens and were not ashamed of it, with a pot of tea and the heel of a dark bread and some soft cheese that Grumble had brought from his brother's farm. Grumble himself was in the back garden, and they could hear him out there in the dark. Creak, scrape, creak, and a running commentary in that low, aggrieved murmur. That was his natural register. He was, Snow thought, the best possible person for this particular task, because he hated the work so much that he was somehow very good at it. The way a person who hates cooking often turns out to be an excellent cook, out of pure spite. "The girls in the basement," Snow said, pouring. "I know," Margaret said. "I've already started." She set down a small notebook, pages dense with careful handwriting. "Names, addresses, villages. It'll take time. Some of them." She paused, and in the pause was a weight that Snow recognized. "Some of them won't come all the way back, but some will." "But some will," Margaret agreed. Snow drank her tea. Outside, Grumble's shovel struck something hard, and he swore softly to himself with great feeling. And both women looked at the window for a moment, with the fond exasperation of people who share a complicated life. with someone impossible. He's going to give us a whole speech about this in the morning, Snow said. He does every time. Margaret broke the bread. He never actually stops helping. No, Snow said. He never does. The candles burned low. The moon moved. The garden received what the garden received. And the earth, as it always has, kept quiet about it. Now, the storytellers will tell you, this story ends badly, because stories about women who refuse their endings always end badly in the hands of storytellers who need their endings to mean certain things. But this is what I heard, and I'll tell it true. Snow stayed at Hollow Hill. She kept the accounts the way Margaret had kept them, and she freed the girls in the glass cases, one by one, as Margaret found their names and their villages, and Grumble drove them home in the old cart at night, complaining the whole way, because he was Grumble, and the world did not change him. They lived well. They lived on their own terms. The system, whatever curse or engine or old story had been grinding them through its gears, sputtered and knocked, and eventually, like all systems that depend on cooperation, simply stopped. The last prince came to Hollow Hill. He did not leave it. There was no 61st. Some folks around here still talk about the lights in Hollow Hill, how they burn late and warm on winter nights, and how, if you come to the door cold and wretched and in genuine need, the woman who answers will feed you without asking your business. How she has dark hair and pale skin, and a way of looking at you that is patient and bottomless and very old. How she smiles, like she knows the ending and has made her peace with it. That smile, they say, is the only frightening thing about her. Everything else, they say, is just practical. So goes the tale of Hollow Hill. Whether you believe it or not, doesn't change what's in the garden. And what's in the garden, as any old-timer hereabouts will tell you, is best left unasked about. Some stories, they finish themselves,